Welcome, everyone. My name is Leslie Van Duzer. I'm professor in the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at the University of British Columbia. I'm pleased to welcome you to the third SALA off-script conversation in our inaugural series, Falling Cities, curated by Greg Girard. And welcome back, Greg.
Hi there.
Before I introduce you, I want to offer our gratitude to the anonymous SALA alumnus who has made this series and so many other events possible. You know who you are, and we are deeply grateful for your support of the school. I also want to extend thanks to Emma Fennell, Sarah Klim, and Thina Talk for helping bring the off-script project to fruition. Well, we could not have asked for a better inaugural curator. Born in Canada, photographer Greg Girard spent decades living and working in Asia, and he has generously brought that experience to bear in his curation of this series. So represented by Monte Clark Gallery here in Vancouver, Greg's photographs have been acquired by numerous museums and are featured in multiple volumes, including his award-winning City of Darkness Revisited, an extensive documentation of Kowloon Walled City, Phantom Shanghai, Hotel Okinawa, and several books of his vintage photos from the 70s and 80s, including Under Vancouver, Tokyo Yokosuka, and HKPM. So 2 weeks ago, Greg led a fascinating conversation about Hong Kong with author Louisa Lim and artist and urbanist Samson Wong. Last week, he brought us Saigon-born photographer Anne Mi Le, which was wonderful. And so today, Greg will be in conversation with award-winning Dutch photographer IWAN BAAN. And I would like to welcome IWAN. Hello.
Hey,
It's
how are you?
Hi. It's a great honor to have you with us, and thank you for joining us from Amsterdam. And
Thank you.
I'm going to make myself scarce, but IWAN, I just want to first introduce you to our audience, and then I'll sign off. Many know you for your photographs of buildings by the world's most famous architects, Herzog and de Meuron, Oma, Sana, Frank Gehry, Wang Xu, Mass, and the list goes on. He's especially appreciated for creating images that narrate the life that unfolds within architecture. After his studies in photography at the Royal Academy of Arts in The Hague, IWAN followed his interest in documentary photography before turning his focus to the various ways individuals and communities create and interact with their built environment. So as you describe it, you say that your photographs reveal our innate ability to reappropriate objects and materials to create places we can call our own. And this can clearly be seen in his work on informal communities, where vernacular architecture and placemaking serve as examples of human ingenuity. So in addition to being widely published in prominent magazines and newspapers, IWAN has collaborated on several books, which we were just discussing before we went live. It's fascinating. The books include Insular Insight, where art and architecture conspire with nature, Brasilia and Chandigarh, Living with Modernity, and just to mention a few, and Torre David, Informal Vertical Communities. Today, IWAN will discuss his photographs of Torre David in Caracas, a series that won him the Golden Lion for the best installation at the 2012 Venice Architecture Biennale, and they will discuss other projects as well. Finally, before I say goodbye, I just want to tell the audience, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and Greg and IWAN will get to as many as possible at the end of the exchange. And so now over to the two of you.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you.
IWAN, thanks for doing this. It's great to finally speak with you and see you. I know it's evening in Amsterdam or in the Netherlands at the moment, so thanks for being available. As Leslie mentioned in her introduction, you work with some of the world's most prominent architects, and on the surface, it would seem that the work you do in a place like Torre David is sort of a parallel, separate undertaking. I mean, do you see it that way, or do you see it as all part of the same thing?
Now, I certainly approach all these projects from the commissioned work to these projects which start more out of my own interest in exactly the same way. Often also these projects kind of come out in a way from like the commissioned projects, or at least the places where you are, because they kind of pique your interest. And especially with the Torre David, it was that kind of started like that. I went to Caracas the first time, I think in 2009, for a project I was doing with the MoMA in New York, the museum. And that was when I learned about this tower. And then actually it still took a long time before I could actually enter the tower, but my interest was certainly peaked during that first visit. And from there, this longer term project.
Okay, yeah, no, and that was sort of what I was going to ask was, how the project and the collaboration with Urban Think Tank came about. I mean, your book, Torre David, Informal Vertical Communities, was, I guess, like many of your projects, a collaboration and with Urban Think Tank. So how did that come about? Your initial interest in the place, having visited Caracas.
Yeah. So the first time I went to Caracas, that was actually for this exhibition at the MoMA. That was especially on new architecture projects in many of these developing countries in very unusual circumstances, with very unusual clients and budgets and briefs. And one of these projects was the cable car system. Urban Think Tank, the architects who had their office at the time in Caracas, built there in Caracas. It was a vernacular cable car system which connected the barrios, the slums, with downtown Caracas, because Caracas is a city where almost 70% of the population lives in these informal cities, the slums, the barrios, kind of literally draping over every hillside in the city. And these informal places are being built. Of course, there's no city planning or anything done, so there were no roads, no real connections. Yeah, you can see that well here in this picture. The context of Caracas, like you see there more on the right side, the regular city, the city center, and then these barrios and the hills surrounding it, where houses are literally built on top of each other. So Urban Think Tank built this cable car system which connected these barrios on the top of these hills with a cable car to downtown. There's many people who just have their regular day-to-day jobs in downtown, in the offices, in houses, and places around downtown, and otherwise had to walk back half an hour up the hill. And now they had the kind of public transport from these barrios back into the city.
I remember Caracas, Venezuela, at a time when it was a kind of a stylish, modern, well-to-do place. I mean, I've never been myself, but in the 70s, Caracas, Venezuela was sort of a bit of a world player, and
Totally, yeah.
I think a lot of that had to do with the results of the Arab oil embargo, which Venezuela stepped into the breach. And as oil prices skyrocketed, the Venezuelan economy started doing, extremely well, attracting even students of Mies van der Rohe and Walter Gropius to establish practices in Caracas. And there was this kind of this confluence of money and architectural ambition, and that kind of marked the 70s. Things have changed things have turned around massively since then, and we no longer think of Caracas or Venezuela, I think, in those terms. I mean, I was a young man in the 1970s, and I remember that. It's maybe a footnote in history to other people, but I mean, how much were you aware of this kind of I don't know if we can call it a golden period, but by comparison, this prosperity of Caracas and Venezuela? I mean, how aware were you of that, and how much that kind of come into your looking at things when you arrived?
Definitely. You still feel that in a way, that feeling in the city. Like there are amazing pieces of architecture still in many places of the city. The university, many villas, as you said, like where world-class architects from the time had a chance to build really incredible pieces. I visited one of the Gioponti villas there also, which is this incredible villa on top of one of the hills with a 360 degrees view around the city. So in these kind of places, you definitely feel that it was a very cosmopolitical place in that time. And of course, things turned 180 degrees, end of the 70s, early 80s. And it was also kind of, in a way, the start of this unusual project, the Torre David, which started its construction end of the 70s. It was supposed to be the headquarters of the largest bank there in Caracas. They started the construction, they topped out, and then the whole economy went down. The bank went bankrupt, and it stood empty for many years before people found it a different way to live in there.
Right. And so you became aware of this 45-story skyscraper that was basically abandoned by the developer after the financing fell through, bank collapse. And as I understand it, it stood pretty much empty for through the 1990s. And then it became kind of a destination for people who were living in surrounding communities to try to establish homes in the center of the city. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the event or the events that kind of brought that to the fore? Where was there one event that kind of happened that kind of launched this occupation?
I'm not sure if there was a singular event which started it, but of course, like the economy went from bad to worse to worse to worse over the last 3 decades. And so basically all investments there in the country stopped, new housing stopped. At the same time, more and more people, the density of the city only grew, and people had to find ways basically to live in every nook and corner they could possibly find or could possibly build themselves. So you first see like all these hills surrounding the city, which are completely filled up with informal self-built housing. But then also like every open plot in the city, people started to build places for themselves, empty buildings. They started to invade. The moment you would leave your house there for a longer time uninhabited, people would take it over, and it was sort of accepted by the government that people would take these places. And yeah, then at a certain point, I think it was early 2000s that people saw this opportunity. Like, it's the second tallest building in Caracas. It's a very visible place right in the center of the city. This huge concrete frame, basically. So it was a building, which topped out all the concrete floors are there. What you see in this picture also, like, there's one facade which was finished, which was covered, but inside it was a completely raw and unfinished building. And no elevators, no running water, electricity, or anything in there. But people saw the potential in that. Like, of course, when you have to find a place to live in, the first thing you need is a kind of shelter, a roof over your head, and that's there already. And then from there you can sort of slowly start fixing it up and building it out. And slowly more and more people came there together, and it became this completely living community where at some point almost 3,000 people lived in this vertical city almost. Yeah, what you see here, like in this close-up also, maybe if you go back one picture, you see one facade, the facade which wasn't finished, just the concrete columns. It was, of course, completely open on the sides, and people started basically, everyone had its own apartment in between the columns, and people started to fix those places up. And you get in the end this kind of incredible living facade where every part is different, and everyone makes sort of their own addition and creates a kind of livable space out of that. And it can happen, of course, over many years. People start with very simple materials, but as time goes on and things improve, like you get the most incredible detailed interiors, which we'll probably see later here.
One thing that starts to kind of appear repeatedly as we look at these pictures and as we see here is what I gather is the kind of ubiquitous red brick material, which isn't part of the original plan, but presumably that's been bought from wherever nearby and carried up these floors to whatever level. And used as the material to divide or secure or add to the shelter, and it seems sort of like a mark of the village in the city, where the material is perhaps from the hillside communities that they're familiar with, and they use that, and presumably it's the cheapest material available as well. But I like the way it sort of signals this new material from the village and the city.
Yeah, no, it's both, of course, like a material which is readily available, but also, like, you have to imagine that, like, there's no elevators or anything in the building, so people have to carry all the material up, and like it's your 45-story walk up basically. So bricks, you can carry them a few at a time up, and like slowly, like that tower literally got occupied from the bottom up. Like the top floors where people were living actually were up to like the 28th floor, so 30th floor. Above that, it became probably too difficult to really walk up and live up there.
Right.
But definitely the brick is, you see that everywhere also, like the hillsides, like they feel like mountains of brick almost surrounding the city.
Caracas has a reputation for being a dangerous place, and I know that in certain years it tops the list of having the highest murder rate in the world. So how much how much does that come into play for you when you consider a project like this and negotiate the city? How do you
Yeah,
deal with that?
yeah, like it is indeed, yeah, it's a place where you have to be careful, and especially like in the barrios there, like I was walking always around with someone from these neighborhoods, a kind of security, someone who knows everyone and can introduce you and kind of deflect situations, which certainly happened there also when I was there. In a way, though, like the Torre David, because it's such a compact structure and people controlled very well kind of who came in and out. Like it was a completely safe environment in terms of yeah, being there. Like you have to watch your step definitely, because often like there's no handrails or anything, but in terms of personal safety, it was fine there. Like it took us a long time to get access there. Like I heard or like I saw the project basically the first time like I was there in Caracas, and I was walking around the city. Like it's such a visible thing there in the middle of the city. But that was also like the help of the people there of the urban think tank, a young architect there in the office who went there basically for months daily to try to get yeah, the trust of the people there, uh, uh, yeah, expressing our interest in like documenting their way of living and what they were doing there, and also helping them with things. And then slowly we got access there to the place. And once you're in, you become almost part of the family there. And people are also at the same time like so proud of what they built. Like they built it all with their own hands. And once you're in there, like you have kind of free access, and they show you everything.
I imagine that once you're inside, it's perhaps even safer than most other parts of Caracas.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Okay.
um, when you begin a project like this, how much do you have a kind of a plan in mind in terms of what you're trying to do? And how much are you kind of responding to what's there as you go around? I mean, do you have either a literal or a mental checklist? You know, how do you just kind of start on your, say,
No,
your
like it's,
photographing?
yeah. I think in a way like it's kind of impossible to plan for a project like this, because everything is so unusual when you get in there. Like uh, what people do there, how they made their spaces, what you encounter there. Like there's nothing you can really plan for in the beginning. So it's really an intuitive way of sort of slowly that world there is opening up, and people invite you in their places, and slowly kind of this whole world is literally kind of opening up. And it's just, yeah, being there and being with these people and being led around, and kind of one thing leads to another, and that kind of yeah,
Right. No,
works like that.
you get the sense. I mean, as we'll see, that there's no way you're going to be able to do anything like this without acceptance on some level. I mean, you're within a space that is, I guess it's actually guarded to keep out people who shouldn't be there, which is obviously a good thing.
Yeah.
Um, in the middle of this picture, just behind the first blue rising stairs, we see some looks like pieces of wood
Wooden.
stretched
Yeah,
across
yeah.
an opening. Is that what we're seeing here as well, in a kind of effort at
It's kind of the
protecting?
full protection. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's like you see like the staircases, like they go up 45 stories without handrails or anything, and these were the elevator shafts. I think next to the staircases, elevators which were never installed. So these shafts which still completely open. So yeah, definitely you have to watch your step in all these places. But yeah, that's the way they do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then this structure, it's also interesting. So this is the a parking garage which is connected to the tower. A parking garage is only 15 stories tall. But then people find ways basically for all these things, yeah, to make it work. Like, of course, there's no elevators in the main structure. So in the parking garage, like taxi services started offering their services basically just to drive people up and down the ramp. So then at least you're up already 15 stories and you have to walk up a fewer stories if you're all the way on the top, or if you're in the bottom 50 stories, you get directly to your goods, anything, basically.
Um, how much time did you spend in Caracas working on this? Did you do it in multiple trips, or?
Yeah, I think most of the pictures were done, I think like in 4 trips or so. And then, yeah, each time I was there for a number of days, depending a little bit what I encountered there.
Right.
Sometimes a week, or yeah.
Right. And so you would stay in a hotel in the city and find your way to Torre David to do your work.
Most time, like I stayed overnight actually there. I think 2 nights also just to experience what it is really to be there. But yeah, often I stayed nearby. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you see like how people, yeah, they become completely oblivious for that environment. For them, it's a total normal, of course, to live there and to have created that place. And like they, if at first when you get in this place, like you're like the vertical you have, like with like you see this couple walking by, like a deep opening next to them, like yeah, the first couple of days you're super aware of these things, but then it becomes kind of a natural habitat for you, and you find your way around all these kind of obstacles.
Yeah. And generally, how did people respond to you? Did they kind of ignore you or engage, or what was that like?
And no, like certainly I was an outsider there, but which people usually never expect there inside the building. And then people were all of them basically super friendly. And yeah, what I was saying earlier, like people are also so proud of what they built there, basically with their own hands, and how they made it work. That once you start explaining a little bit what you're doing there and your interest in the place, like a whole world is opening up, and people tell you, oh, I have a friend on that floor, you have to see his house, or come and look at this. And yeah, people bring you from one thing into another.
This is quite extraordinary. Presumably it's just a convenient hole that's punched through a wall to allow, to avoid walking around or up or down to get to where you want to go.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, absolutely. And then here on the left side, you see a little shop. So also for these kind of things, like of course, each floor, basically, yeah, if you live there on the 15th floor and you need a pack of sugar, you need to walk down 15 floors. It's quite something. So people started little shops basically on each floor to help other people there on the floor. So each floor has these little convenience stores where yeah, you buy your basic ingredients, and like the store is also just like a hole in the wall. Basically, someone lives in that store, it's their house also, but at the same time, like they sell basic ingredients for your dinner, and other things you need. It becomes part of that fabric.
What was it like in the evenings? Was it, I mean, do you hear the sounds of kind of life, like televisions and radios and conversations? I mean, it seems like quite a spread out place, but what was it like just in terms of proximity to life going on?
Yeah. Of course, it's pretty dense. Of course, like it's a tower. Almost 3,000 people were living in there at the height. Uh, and then like there's doors are often tiny and thin. Of course, there's mostly no windows or any insulation or so. So you're literally inside this sort of humming engine of city life, and you hear the stories from your neighbors up and down and in and out. So it's definitely totally alive. Yeah, kind of city where you're immersed in the middle of.
Right. I mean, in a normal neighborhood on a dark street, in a bad neighborhood rather, on a dark street, you'd feel a certain amount of caution. But
Totally.
I guess because this place is protected, the dark corners and the dark alleys don't have that kind of association.
No.
Is that be
No,
right?
absolutely. No, like there's of course a very strong social awareness of people, like what's happening in the hallways, in the apartments, in the places around them. So I never felt uncomfortable actually there. Like whereas like in the barrios outside, you have to be a bit careful, and especially at night, you feel when places are more alone, like that's. You have to be careful, but that's different in such a dense environment like this.
I mean, I like this for the kind of they're they've partially made things up to as much as they can
Yeah,
afford, one presumes, and
yeah, yeah,
everything kind of looks like a work in progress. And it's got a you know uh, almost fashionable in a way, showing the supporting structure for the roof parts. I mean, it's a really quite stylish place.
yeah. No, it could be almost a loft in New York.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah, no, no, like that was of course like how all these projects started. Like people just start with an open space and just that roof over their head, and then like they define their space with just a few curtains or a few bed sheets, and that's their space. And slowly over time, they bring up bricks. They start decorating their place. Literally, you see these walls rise. Like I've other pictures where you see people still live in kind of apartments, but the walls are basically waist high. So if you sleep, you have your privacy, but you stand up, you see your neighbors, and slowly these walls go up and up, and people start decorating that, some put in like proper ceilings. So like at the same time, like every apartment becomes a kind of work of art almost, and becomes totally unique in that sense.
I mean, just on a maybe on a photographic note, if I may. I mean, it looks like so much of your work does quite like a casual observation, but there's an incredible amount of kind of rigor that's actually gone into it. And if I'm not mistaken, you've actually used like lighting in this picture.
No, no, I never use artificial
Okay.
lighting.
Just
So
like
this
the
is just
shadow.
the natural light. Um, Often in these places, you see it actually here on the left, the top left, like it's just like a
Okay.
bare light bulb, which kind of lights the space in a way very flat. And I think there's one more light bulb like that behind me, which
Mhm.
gives kind of this flat light.
Mhm.
But like I always like to use existing light also for my commissioned work for architects. Like I feel a space gives such an atmosphere, like if or an architect has deliberately thought about the light in that space, but also like in these kind of self-built spaces, you want to give that feeling of the light conditions and
Mhm.
how it's used. So I basically never use artificial
Okay,
lighting.
interesting. I guess it's maybe this the different direction of the light sources that kind of you have a multiple light source
Yeah, yeah.
kind of
No,
picture.
I think in this particular image, it's like another bare light bulb, which is probably just behind me, hanging, which gives this flat,
Yeah,
direct
yeah,
light.
very nicely done.
Yeah.
And again, we see that kind of partially private,
Ah,
but sort of
yeah.
open too.
This picture I was referring to, like where you see the walls are basically kind of waist height. Yeah, people divided a little bit of space with some curtains, but like they're literally rising as you come.
Right. And then some people have like put up plasterboard or covered it in either some kind of wallpaper or just paint.
Yeah,
And you know, kind of could be any, you know, and could be anywhere sort of look.
totally. Yeah, and you see also like they even put in a ceiling, lighting, floors, everything. Yeah.
Right. I was reading in the book about Torre David that it seems like the flooring was like the last place people spent money. It was mostly just sort of like bare concrete, and the material costs were spent on walls and other places, but most of the floors were more or less that kind of.
Definitely, yeah, yeah. But most of them were just the way they found them. But there's also like examples of places where people made incredible tile floors and all kind of other additions. So it's like I think it all depended also like how long people were staying there. And like all these things, you saw them also over the visits. I came there, like that things were improving each time.
And so in this picture, it's a woman who has a home business or a primary business in her home.
Yeah, yeah. No, so this it's basically like a blueprint of a whole city inside the tower. Everything you find in a regular city happened kind of in a way in that tower as well. So you see the shops, you see the manufacturing, you see the hairdressers. Oh yeah, here, like basically everything is inside the tower. Also because a lot of people, it takes some effort to go in and out. So people sort of created their own environment in there, and all these different services for other residents or people outside the tower started up.
That's the shop next to the hole, and again we see that red clay brick.
Yeah, yeah, and a little shop.
And this is quite extraordinary. A guy lifting weights on, I guess it's one of the upper floors. I'm not sure what floor we're on, but it seems pretty high here.
Yeah, I think this is about the 28th or 30th floor. People with an incredible view over the city who built their house there. And this guy actually, he found like the parts of the elevators which were never installed, and he created the gym out of that. Like they became the weights for his gym, and people are working out there with this kind of incredible view over the city.
That is
just also with found materials.
I mean, it must have been breathtaking. I mean, it's an extraordinary picture. At what point did things? Why did things kind of top out at the 28th floor? Was that just kind of the limit of how far people wanted to walk? I mean, was that just the limits of endurance?
Part of that, but also like above the 28th floor. If you see one of the first images again, the floor plates get smaller. Like probably in the original plans, those were kind of the executive offices. Like each floor was maybe one big room with a 360-degree view around. So they became probably harder to inhabit, also like for different apartments, and more of the space would be just used by circulation. So it's probably also a way what was kind of feasible for people people to make apartments in, which ended above the 30th floor.
Was this the atrium space?
Yeah, so this was the kind of more the public atrium. Was supposed to be a covered atrium, like the cover, of course, also was never there, but also there, like in between each column, people started to build their houses, and that became another part. But you see here at the bottom, it's kind of the entrance of the building. You see this palm tree sort of sticking out. So it was just this opening in the middle of the concrete, and yeah, people start to decorate it also. Like it's still a public space basically for the residents of the tower, and people made a little basketball field there. They planted some trees and tried to make it, like they painted, and they tried to make it a nice and livable space.
Right. And we're seeing like kind of two separate, are they two separate buildings here that are part of the same complex? Or is that just an extension?
Yeah, I think you're looking here from the parking structure towards the main building. So you see also like one of the facades where you look at is the facade which had partly the glass installed, and the other facade is the open facade where you see each person made their own apartment in there.
Okay. So this is up on the on the roof where the or the 28th floor with the weightlifter with his family.
Yeah.
Unbelievable view.
You see these kids, they're running around. You're on the 28th floor with no handrails or anything.
That's just a sheer drop, right? I mean,
it's a big drop down there, yes. But yeah, the moment you live there, like you're of course aware of these limitations. That I haven't heard of any accidents really happening there.
Right. Just very quickly, if we may just go on to your project that you did in Africa, Africa Modernism. Can you just briefly tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so that's another book I did with Manuel Hertz and the ETH University in Switzerland. Like this project started about 6-7 years ago, I think. Manuel Hertz, the architect, was doing with his students this research project on these cities or these countries in Africa. He focused on a number of countries, which were all in a very particular moment in time, in the 60s and 70s, just after their independence, where they hired mainly foreign architects, and mainly they were architects also from their former colonizing countries, strangely enough, to build their main government buildings, universities, large public buildings, the parliaments, and so on. And it was, of course, a very particular moment in time. Like these countries was sort of a bright new future, and like they had these big ambitions, and hired these architects. Of course, many of these places, its life was also difficult, and many of these places were not as kept for or used or in a way, or and also never really documented. So for us, it was a very interesting moment to go back now and see how these places were used and taken over by people. And became also kind of this encyclopedia of what was built there on the continent. So we focused on these 5 countries: Ghana, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, Kenya, and Zambia. And we're working now actually on the 2nd volume with 3, hopefully 4 more countries. I still have to visit 1 or 2 places, which is at the moment difficult.
Great. I didn't have. I was too late to get your first edition. I'll have to buy it at somewhere, bookstore or or something. But there's some questions that have come in, and I'll try to get through some of those now. Your images show moments in time. Have you had experiences where you took shots one day and realized what you saw and experienced changed in the following days or was different the days before? If so, can you share details?
Definitely, like especially when you go back a number of times, like you see also how these places improve and what people do there over time. I don't have immediately a picture at hand where you see that that change, but for sure you come back to places, and sometimes also when I visited the place the second or the third time, like people invited me to show what they did and upgrade it in their apartment. So definitely that's yeah, things you encounter often in these places.
Next is a comment more than a question. The invasions to private property was promoted by the Chavez government. That was the event that triggered the invasion of Torre David. So I guess he's referring to the kind of legitimacy of that kind of appropriation that was popular during that period of the Chavez government.
Yeah. I'm not completely sure if it was really promoted. Like I know that a number of times, like people were tried to invade it and they were thrown out. I forget now actually what was the trigger that finally like kept people in there, and I'm also not completely sure what the status of it is now. Like last time I was in Caracas was in 2015 or early 16, and you felt also like Caracas is at the moment of course in a very difficult state, and at that time there was talk that the building was bought by a Chinese developer who wanted to upgrade it and develop it and try to move everyone out. And I know that these kind of events happened before that. Either the government or developer or people try to get the residents out, but that never really worked. And also the last time I was there, like it's people kept coming back, like they were offered housing often then like far away from the city center. Of course, like their whole economic livelihood is there in or around the building. So the government built social housing far outside the city, try to lure people there, but these kind of projects often fail.
This next question sort of addresses some of that. Torre David is no longer inhabited. It is now a historic phenomenon, amazing and contradictory. In your exposition, you didn't talk about the political issue involved here. How come? For Venezuelans, Torre David is connected to politics. It's a symbol of the terrible effects of the revolution. So, I mean, that's on me to not ask the question about the politics, but can you maybe respond to what he's asking?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like ethics are horrible there, and you see and feel that like in every part of the country and the city there. Like if 70% of the population is forced to find shelter in kind of any possible structure or build their own structures, and that's of course show failure of such a government and such a society there, which is incredibly difficult. It's just an like really uplifting to see that people take matters in their own hands and figure out ways to make it work even under these terrible circumstances.
Another question is, thank you for the discussion today. For a long time, Torre David is a fascinating, provocative study in people claiming space and finding agency in an urban environment. some of the criticism of how Torre David was portrayed and shared, which is also directed at studies of informal communities generally, as a case study, is that it can be seen as an exploitation of poverty of populations of people, even when it is a celebratory validation of the vibrance and ingenuity of these communities, while not critically addressing the underlying precariousness of the political, social, economic situation about. Can you speak to your understanding of how your work and the work you have been part of in these communities fits into helping these communities? And what response do you think architects have in terms of engaging with these communities?
It's of course a very difficult issue always when you encounter these places. And when I come from such a different environment and encounter these, at the same time, like it's still probably the majority in the world, people who have to figure out ways to live and to make a shelter and a place for themselves. And yeah, I, as a photographer, am also trying to show the diversity of what people find, accept as a sort of normal way of living, and figure out ways to live in kind of incredible circumstances and create a place for themselves, and create for themselves out of any kind of materials or circumstance, and incredible variety, what sort of comes out of there. It's an issue, like when you come to places like I come of course from a very privileged background, that I'm able to travel there and to see there. So I hope just to bring an understanding and an awareness of these kind of places, and the variety of the difference of how people make that kind of environment for themselves. And both from of course there's incredible poverty also in these kind of places, but if you look at other places, which I'm frequently documenting, more the vernacular, the ways how people lived for hundreds or thousands of years in creating a kind of environment, literally from materials they found there on site, the stone, the sand, the mud, the kind of the things which grow in their environment, and create kind of incredible ways of shelter around that. I feel that's I'm trying to document all these differences and varieties in a kind of similar way, and hope to give some understanding in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think for some of these communities, the only attention they've ever gotten is negative, either the kind of prejudices or discrimination against the economic underclass that can be so pronounced. And in the beginning, just by paying attention to it, often there's the assumption that you're perpetuating some of that. And I mean, I don't think anybody spends, weeks of their life looking at something unless there's a certain amount of sympathy. But is that often a barrier that you encounter, that the kind of like, why are you doing this question?
Yes, like definitely that question comes up often. At the same time, I feel like when you're in those communities, people are incredibly happy to share what they created. Like, and I feel the same kind of proudness, how these people created these places for themselves, as what I get basically from architects inviting me to photograph their work. And it's like, that's also why I try to show that wide variety of places. And like you can photograph like an apartment building by Herzog and de Meuron, and where the architects are that proud of. But at the other end of the spectrum, you find these kind of places which people built with their own hands, and that same yeah, proudness and what how people yeah invented a way to live there speaks in these kind of places. So, and I'm trying to show that also in my work. It's not you're not trying to show just the poverty or like the terrible circumstances, but there's also like a sort of everyday life going on, and people like yeah also try to make the best of these places.
Indeed. No, I think your point of view is once you look at a series of pictures, it emerges immediately that it's a very, you're sympathetic to who you're with, and that I think to some extent that you're guest in this situation, in this community. And yeah, I mean there's clear, to me anyways, there's clear respect in every frame. So I think that really speaks to the integrity of the project. We're almost out of time, so I'll invite Leslie to come back if she has any questions, or to perhaps wrap things up. But thank you for doing this.
This was great. Thanks so much. It was wonderful to be here.
Well, I want to thank you both very much. Thank you. Before we went live, you were speaking, IWAN, about being in the United States recently and making the effort to go to a Trump rally to see these people and see the community that they live in. And for me, there's a kind of empathy that you display in your willingness, sort of to enter a situation like that, and a sort of an openness to showing things in an empathetic and a little bit objective way.
Yeah, like there's also like a sort of endless curiosity I think you have as a photographer, and probably Greg can also tell about that. But like as a photographer, like it's you have an excuse basically to be in all these kind of different places and circumstances. And yeah, like I happen to work on a project in rural Michigan, where at that moment there was this Trump rally, and I felt that speaks also so much to that place and that environment and the people who live there. So you try to show kind of all these facets in the photography, and like it's not immediately the architecture or the building or so always which needs to be documented. Like you can transmit another story on that place through the people who inhabit that place and what happens there. And sometimes you get to very difficult situations like that, but
I think it
was definitely an eye-opener.
It takes a special kind of person. I think Greg has this quality as well, to be able to enter those situations in a sort of non-judgmental way and be able to document it. And anyway, I appreciate that a lot, and appreciate very much the conversation. Greg, thank you for bringing IWAN to us, and thank you both for joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and this was wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank
IWAN.
you. To the audience, I just want to thank you all for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. Please join us next Wednesday at the same time, 12:30, for Falling Cities Kabul. We'll be in conversation with Fred Scott, who is an award-winning BBC filmmaker and cameraman who has documented war, political violence, and social unrest around the globe. So until we meet again next week, please, everyone, stay safe. And thank you again, Greg and IWAN, very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.